The sun was blazing high above the city of Los Angeles, casting long, sharp shadows across the pavement. It was one of those afternoons where the heat seemed to rise right off the concrete, making the air shimmer and dance. In the middle of the busy park, far away from the red carpets and the flashing cameras of Hollywood, a man sat quietly on a metal bench. He was alone. To anyone walking by in a hurry, he looked like just another guy taking a break. He was wearing a faded black jacket that had seen better days, scuffed boots that looked like they had walked 1,000 miles, and a simple ball cap pulled low over his eyes. His hair was a bit messy, poking out from under the hat. There was no entourage, no fancy cars, and no security guard standing nearby. Just a man, a sandwich, and the quiet noise of the city. This was Keanu Reeves. But on this bench, he wasn't a star of blockbuster movies or the face of a billion-dollar franchise. He was just a human being who needed a moment of peace. He had spent the morning working on a new project, his mind tired and his body feeling the weight of another long day. He didn't want to go back to a trailer or a fancy set. He just wanted to sit on a regular bench, eat a simple sandwich, and watch the world go by. He took a slow bite of his food, chewing thoughtfully. He watched a group of kids playing in the distance, their laughter carrying on the breeze. He watched an old woman walking her dog, moving slowly but with purpose. He found comfort in these ordinary moments. People often think that fame makes life easy, but as he sat there, shoulders slumped forward, he looked like a man carrying the world on his back. He looked tired, not in a way that sleep could fix, but tired in his soul. While Keanu sat in his bubble of quiet, a black and white patrol car was slowly making its way down the winding road of the park. Inside the vehicle were two officers, Officer Davis and Officer Thompson. The air condition in the car was humming, fighting a losing battle against the afternoon heat. Officer Davis, the older of the two, kept his eyes on the road, his face set in a permanent line of frustration. He had been on the force for 20 years, and over those decades, his patience with the city's problems had worn thin. He saw the world in black and white, usually seeing the bad before he could see the good. Next to him, Officer Thompson was younger. He still had some of that eager energy, but he often took his lead from Davis. If Davis said something was wrong, Thompson usually believed him. As the car rolled past the trees, Davis tapped the brake. The car slowed to a crawl. His eyes locked onto the figure sitting alone on the bench. He didn't see a famous actor. He didn't see a man quietly enjoying his lunch. He saw a guy in old, ragged clothes, sitting in a public park when he should probably be somewhere else. "Look at that over there," Davis grumbled, nodding his head toward the bench. Thompson squinted through the windshield. "Just a guy eating lunch, Davis. Looks like he's taking a break." Davis let out a short, sharp laugh. "A break? Look at him. He's probably been sleeping there all night. Look at the boots, the jacket. That's not a work uniform. Kid, that's a vagrant." Davis hated the disorder that he thought people like this brought to park. He wanted the park to be perfect for the families and the tourists, not a hangout for people who didn't fit his idea of order. "We could just keep driving," Thompson suggested, though his voice was unsure. "He isn't bothering anyone. He's loitering," Davis said firmly, putting his hand on the gear shift. "And he looks like he's on something. Look how he's just staring. It's not right. We're supposed to keep this area clean. Let's go have a word." Davis steered the car to the side of the path and parked it. The vehicle idled for a moment before Davis killed the engine. The sudden silence felt heavy. They stepped out of the car, the heat hitting them instantly. They adjusted their belts, making sure their badges were visible. It was a subconscious move, a way of showing authority before they even said a word. Keanu noticed the car pull up out of the corner of his eye. He didn't panic. He didn't run. He just took another sip from his water bottle and assumed they were just patrolling. But when he saw the two officers walking straight toward him, purpose in every step, he knew they were coming for him. He sighed very softly, a sound that was lost in the wind, and prepared himself for whatever was coming. He was used to attention, but usually it was from fans asking for photos. This felt different. This felt cold. Davis walked in front, with Thompson trailing a step behind. They didn't look friendly. They didn't look like they were there to protect and serve. They looked like they were there to enforce their will on the situation. Davis stopped a few feet away from the bench, looking down at Keanu with a mix of disgust and impatience. Keanu looked up, shielding his eyes from the sun with one hand. He offered a polite nod, trying to defuse the tension before it started. He knew that being aggressive never helped in these situations. "Afternoon, officers," Keanu said quietly. His voice was rough but calm. Davis didn't return the greeting. He looked at the sandwich wrapper in Keanu's hand, then at the scuff boots, and finally right into Keanu's eyes. Davis didn't recognize the face staring back at him. To him, it was just the face of another troublemaker wasting time in his park. "This is a public park, not a hotel," Davis said, his voice loud and commanding. It was a voice meant to intimidate, meant to let the person on the bench know exactly who was in charge. Keanu paused, unsure if he had heard correctly. "I know," he replied gently. "I'm just eating. I'm leaving as soon as I'm done." Thompson stood slightly to the side, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. He looked at the man on the bench. There was something familiar about him, something in the way he held himself, but he couldn't quite place it. But Davis was already talking again, drowning out any chance for Thompson to think. "I don't care if you're eating or sleeping," Davis snapped, crossing his arms over his chest. "You can't just sit here looking like that. You're scaring the families. You need to pack up your stuff and move along. Now!" The humiliation began to settle in the air. It wasn't just the words. It was the way Davis said them. There was no respect. It was as if Keanu was invisible, or worse, a nuisance that needed to be wiped away. Keanu looked around. A few people were walking by. Try not to stare, try and pretend they didn't see the confrontation. He felt a flush of embarrassment, not for himself, but for the situation. It was an ugly moment, a moment where judgment overtook humanity. Davis took another step closer, invading Keanu's personal space. "Did you hear me? I said move it." Keanu stayed seated. He was a man who believed in dignity, in treating everyone with respect until they gave him a reason not to. He hadn't given them a reason. He just wanted to finish his lunch. He looked at Davis, his eyes sad but unwavering. "I'm not hurting anyone," Keanu said. "I'm just sitting on a bench." Davis scoffed, turning to look at Thompson. "See this? This is the problem with the city. Everyone thinks they can do whatever they want. No respect for authority." He turned back to Keanu, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "Stand up. We're not going to ask you again. Or, do you want to spend the night in a cell for trespassing?" The sun continued to beat down on the three of them. The metal bench was hot to the touch. The air felt thick and suffocating. Keanu slowly crumpled his sandwich wrapper, the sound of the paper crushing seeming very loud in the sudden silence. He wasn't fighting them. He wasn't arguing. He was just trying to hold on to his peace in a world that was suddenly trying very hard to take it away from him. He had no idea that in just a few moments, the power dynamic between them would shift completely, turning a day of humiliation into a lesson these two officers would never forget. But for now, he was just a man on a bench, at the mercy of two officers who had already made up their minds about him. Davis did not wait for an answer. He stepped even closer, his boots crunching on the gravel path, and leaned down until his face was just inches away from Keanu's. The older officer wanted to make sure the man sitting on the bench understood exactly who was in control. The heat of the afternoon seemed to intensify the moment, making the air feel heavy and hard to breathe. "I said stand up," Davis repeated, his voice dropping to a growl that vibrated in his chest. "Do you have a hearing problem, or do you just think the rules don't apply to you?" Keanu let out a long, slow breath. He could feel his heart beating a little faster, not out of fear, but out of a deep sense of sadness. He had been in the city for decades, contributed to it, loved it. But moments like this reminded him how quickly people could be stripped of their humanity based on nothing more than a snapshot in time. He didn't want to fight. He didn't want a scene. He just wanted the ground to open up and swallow the anger that was radiating off the officer. With a calm, deliberate motion, Keanu placed the remainder of his sandwich on the wrapper beside him. He put his hands on his knees and pushed himself up. He moved slowly, careful not to make any sudden movements that might be misinterpreted as aggression. As he stood to his full height, he was actually taller than Davis, but he didn't use his height to intimidate. He stood with his shoulders slightly curved, making himself smaller, trying to keep the peace. "I can leave," Keanu said, his voice steady and quiet. "I was just finishing my lunch. I didn't know sitting here was against the law." Thompson, the younger officer, took a small step back. Up close, something about the man's face tugged at a memory in the back of his mind. The eyes, in particular, were intense and filled with a kind of melancholy depth that seemed familiar. But Thompson looked at the dirty jacket and the worn-out boots again, and the doubt vanished. There was no way a movie star would be sitting alone on a park bench looking like this. It was just a trick of the light, a coincidence. Davis, however, wasn't interested in coincidences. He was interested in authority. He looked Keanu up and down, sneering at the scuffed leather boots and the faded jacket. "Look at this," Davis said, turning his head slightly to address his partner, but keeping his eyes locked on Keanu. "Guy probably hasn't showered in a week. And this jacket? It looks like he pulled out a trash can." Thompson laughed nervously. It was a weak sound, but he laughed because he felt he had to. "Yeah, doesn't look like he's got a home to go to, that's for sure." Keanu didn't respond to the insults. He just stood there, patient and still. It was a reaction that seemed to annoy Davis even more. The officer was used to people getting angry or shouting back or running away. He didn't know how to handle someone who just stood there and took it with a quiet dignity. It made Davis feel like the bad guy, and he didn't like that feeling. He wanted to prove that he was the good guy, the one keeping the city safe from people who didn't belong. "Empty your pockets," Davis commanded, holding out his hand. "Let's see what you've got in there. You got any ID? Or are you just a ghost?" Keanu hesitated for a fraction of a second. He had his wallet, of course, and inside it were cards with his name and face on them. If he handed them over, this would all end instantly. The humiliation would stop, the officers would apologize, and they would probably ask for a selfie. But he hesitated because he knew that once he pulled out that ID, the dynamic would change instantly. He would stop being a human being in their eyes and become a trophy. He didn't want to play that game. He wanted to be treated with respect because he was a person, not because he was famous. "I don't have any ID on me," Keanu lied softly. "I'm just out for a walk." Davis let out a harsh, barking laugh. "A walk? Dressed like that? Come on, buddy. Who are you fooling?" He reached out and poked Keanu in the chest with a stiff finger. It was a violation of personal space, a physical gesture meant to demean. "Don't lie to me," Davis snarled. "It's insulting. You're panhandling, aren't you? You've been bothering people for money." Keanu looked the officer right in the eye. "I haven't asked anyone for anything. I was just eating my lunch." By now, a few more people had stopped to watch. A mother with a stroller quickened her pace, pulling the cover down to shield her child, not wanting them to see the ugliness of the confrontation. A jogger slowed down, his music playing loudly in his ears, his eyes wide as he took in the scene. The public nature of the humiliation made it sting even more. Keanu could feel their eyes on him. He could feel the judgment transferring from the officers to the bystanders. To them, he was just a homeless man causing trouble. "You see this?" Davis said to the small crowd, raising his voice as if he were putting on a show. "This is why we can't have nice things. People like this think they can just take over the park." Keanu felt a flush of heat rise up his neck. It wasn't anger. It was a pure, burning feeling of being embarrassed in front of strangers. He had walked red carpets with thousands of screaming fans, but this was somehow worse. This was being stripped of his name and his worth, and being reduced to a nuisance. "Officer," Keanu said, his voice tightening just a little. "Please, I'm leaving. I'll go right now." He bent down to pick up his wrapper and his helmet. "Don't touch that." Davis barked, kicking the helmet away with his boot. The black helmet skidded across the pavement, coming to a stop near a trash can. "Pick it up when I tell you to pick it up." The sound of the helmet scraping against the ground echoed in the sudden silence. It was a petty, cruel act. Keanu froze, his hand hovering in midair. He looked at the helmet, then back at Davis. The urge to fight back, to shout, to demand respect flared up hot and bright inside him, but he swallowed it down. He knew that if he lost his temper, things would only get worse. They would arrest him. They would drag him away in handcuffs. And even if he was released 10 minutes later, The damage would be done. So he stood up straight again, his hands hanging loosely at his sides. He looked at Davis with a gaze that was so sorrowful, so devoid of hatred, that it made Thompson shift his weight uncomfortably again. "Why are you doing this?" Keanu asked. It wasn't an accusation. It was a genuine question. "Because I can," Davis said, puffing out his chest. "Because this is my park, and you don't belong here." Davis took a step forward, getting right into Keanu's face again. He could smell the stale coffee on the officer's breath. He could see the sweat on the officer's forehead. "I want to get out of here, and don't come back. If I see you sitting on this bench again, you're going to jail. Do you understand me?" Keanu nodded slowly. "I understand." "Good," Davis said, a smirk spreading across his face. He felt he had won. He had exerted his power. He had put the world back in order. Now get lost. Go sleep under a bridge where you belong. He made a shooing motion with his hands, waving Keanu away as if he were a stray dog. Thompson watched, feeling a strange knot of guilt in his stomach. He looked at the man's face, the way he held his head high despite the filth and the insults. There was a nobility there that Thompson couldn't explain. He wanted to say something, to tell Davis to lay off, but the fear of his partner stopped him. Keanu walked over to where his helmet had landed. He picked it up carefully, brushing a piece of dirt off the glossy black surface. He held it in his hand for a moment, turning it over. It was his only protection on the road, and now it had been treated like trash. He turned to walk away, heading toward his motorcycle parked a few yards away. He kept his head down, trying to hide his expression from the curious eyes of the passers-by. He just wanted to get on his bike and ride, to feel the wind and wash away the feeling of shame. "Hey!" Davis shouted after him, unable to let it go. "Don't forget your trash." The officer picked up the crumpled sandwich wrapper and lobbed it at Keanu's back. It bounced off the leather jacket and fell to the ground. Keanu stopped. He didn't turn around. He just stood there for a second, the sunlight beating down on his neck. The park was deadly silent now. Everyone was watching. The humiliation was complete. Davis stood there with his chest puffed out, thinking he had taught a valuable lesson to a nobody. Thompson looked at his feet, wishing he was anywhere else but here. But the story wasn't over. Just as Keanu bent down to pick up the wrapper that had been thrown at him, a woman's voice cut through the heavy air like a knife. It was a voice filled with shock and disbelief, stopping Davis in his tracks and freezing Keanu to the spot. "Oh my God!" the woman gasped, loud enough for everyone to hear. "That is not just some guy. That's Keanu Reeves." The word seemed to hang in the hot, still air, suspended like dust motes in a beam of light. "Oh my God! That is not just some guy. That's Keanu Reeves." For a split second, nobody moved. The park, which had been buzzing with the quiet sounds of city afternoon, fell into a dead silence. It was the kind of silence that feels heavy, like the air before a thunderstorm, though the sky above remained perfectly clear. The woman who had spoken stood a few yards away, one hand covering her mouth, her eyes wide with disbelief. She was looking past officers, directly at the man in the faded jacket. Officer Davis froze. His hand was still halfway through a shooing motion, a gesture that felt powerful and authoritative just a moment ago. Now it looked ridiculous. He didn't turn around immediately. His brain was trying to process the information, try to reject it because it didn't fit the reality he had built in his head. "Keanu, who?" Davis barked, though his voice lacked the sharp edge it had only seconds before. He laughed, a short, nervous sound. "Lady, are you kidding me? This guy? Look at him." He pointed a thumb over his shoulder, still refusing to look at the man he had just bullied. He expected the crowd to laugh with him, to side with the badge and the uniform, but nobody laughed. In fact, the atmosphere was shifting so rapidly it made his head spin. People who had been hurrying past, trying to ignore the confrontation, stopped in their tracks. They pulled out their phones, not to call for backup, but to take pictures. The energy in the park changed from tense to electric. Thompson, the younger officer, felt a cold chill run down his spine that had nothing to do with the heat. He turned his head slowly and really looked at the man standing by the motorcycle. He looked past the dirt and the messy hair. He looked at the face. And there it was, the jawline, the eyes. That specific, sad intensity that Thompson had seen on a movie screen 100 times. The familiarity that had been nagging at him suddenly clicked into place with the force of a hammer blow. It wasn't a hobo. It wasn't a vagrant. It was the guy from The Matrix. It was John Wick. It was one of the most famous actors on the planet. "Boss," Thompson whispered, his voice cracking. "Davis, turn around." Davis scowled, annoyed by his partner's sudden nervousness. "What are you talking about? We're clearing the area." "Just look at him," Thompson hissed, his eyes darting from the man to the growing crowd of onlookers. "Please, just look." Finally, Davis turned. He looked at Keanu Reeves with fresh eyes, stripping away his prejudice about the clothes and the posture. And as he looked, the blood drained from his face. The smirk vanished, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated horror. The recognition hit him like a punch to the gut. It was unmistakable. The man standing there, holding a crumpled sandwich wrapper, was a global icon. The realization didn't bring relief. It brought terror. Davis's mind raced forward at 1,000,000 miles an hour. He thought about the phones pointed at them. He thought about the internet. He thought about the headlines. Police officer bullies movie star in park. He saw his career flashing before his eyes. He saw suspension, investigations, and public shame. All the power he felt a minute ago dissolved, leaving him feeling small and exposed. Keanu stood there, silent and still. He didn't say, "Yes, it's me." He didn't puff out his chest or demand an apology. He just looked at them, his expression unreadable. He watched the realization dawn on their faces. He watched Davis go from a bully to a scared man in the blink of an eye. The crowd was murmuring now. "Is it really him?" "I think it is." "Oh, wow." He looked so different in real life. A few people stepped closer, no longer afraid of the police, but drawn by the celebrity. The dynamic had flipped completely. The officers were no longer the predators. They were the ones being watched, judged, and recorded. Davis took a step back, his hands trembling slightly at his sides. Mr. Reeves?" he stammered. His voice was weak, a pathetic shadow of the booming command he had used earlier. I didn't recognize you." Keanu looked at the sandwich wrapper in his hand. He calmly walked over to a nearby trash can, the one Davis had pointed earlier, and dropped the wrapper in. He took his time, brushing his hands together. The silence stretched out, agonizing for the officers, but peaceful for Keanu. "You didn't recognize me," Keanu repeated softly. It wasn't a question. He turned back to face them. "Or you didn't like the way I looked." Thompson stepped forward, his face red with shame. "Sir, I am so sorry. We thought you were, we didn't know." He was babbling, the words tumbling out in a desperate rush to fix the unfixable. "We were just doing our job, keeping the park safe, and we misread the situation. Terribly." Davis nodded frantically, sweat beading on his forehead despite the heat. "Yes, exactly. A mistake. A big misunderstanding. If we had known, you're wearing a hat and a jacket." He was trying to justify his behavior, but every word he spoke made it sound worse. He was admitting that they had treated him poorly because of how he looked. Keanu listened. He watched them squirm. He could see the fear in their eyes. They weren't afraid of him. They were afraid of what they had done. They were afraid of being exposed as cruel. A lesser man might have yelled. He might have demanded their badge numbers right there in front of the crowd. He might have humiliated them the way they had tried to humiliate him. But Keanu just stood there. He felt a profound sense of tiredness. This was why he wore the old clothes and the beat-up boots. It was a test. He wanted to see how the world treated a person who didn't look like a millionaire. And today the world had failed. These officers, sworn to protect and serve, had seen a tired man and decided he was trash. The woman who had spoken earlier stepped closer, her phone still raised. "I got it all on video," she said, her voice firm. She looked at the officers with disdain. "I saw how you treated him. You kicked his helmet. You threw trash at him. That's disgusting." Davis flinched as if he had been slapped. He looked at the phone, then at the ground. He knew he was defeated. There was no talking his way out of this. The evidence was right there in digital format, ready to be uploaded for the whole world to see. Keanu held up a hand gently toward the woman. It's okay, he said. Please don't post it yet. The woman lowered her phone, looking surprised. But they were awful to you. They were doing what they thought was right, Keanu said, lying smoothly to save them from immediate public execution. He turned his attention back to the officers. He looked at Davis, searching for a shred of humanity beneath the uniform and the fear. I'm just a guy, Keanu said, his voice carrying across the small circle of people. I was eating a sandwich. I didn't have my ID on me because I didn't think I needed it to eat lunch. But even if I wasn't who I am, even if I was just a guy with no home, would it have mattered? Does that change how I should have been treated? The question hung in the air, heavier than the heat. It wasn't an accusation. It was a lesson. It cut through Davis's defenses like a hot knife through butter. The older officer opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. He looked at his boots, the same boots that had kicked the helmet. He felt small. He felt dirty. Thompson couldn't meet Keanu's eyes. He looked at the gravel, ashamed. The silence stretched out, broken only by the distant sound of city traffic. The crowd waited, holding their breath. They were waiting for the movie star to destroy the police officer. But Keanu had no interest in destruction. He was interested in dignity. He reached down and picked up his helmet, holding it firmly in his hand. We all have hard days, Keanu said finally, his tone kind but final. I forgive the mistake. But maybe next time, try looking a little closer, before you judge. Davis swallowed hard, his throat dry. Yes, sir. I will. Keanu gave a small, sad nod. He didn't wait for them to leave. He didn't wait for an escort. He simply turned his back on them, swung his leg over his motorcycle, and settled onto the seat. The engine roared to life with a powerful growl that echoed off the trees. It was a sound of strength, a stark contrast to the quiet defeat the officers were feeling. As he sat there, the engine idling, the two officers stood frozen to the spot. They weren't arresting him. They weren't ordering him to move. They were just watching, struck dumb by the grace they had just witnessed. The man they had tried to humiliate had just taught them the most important lesson of their lives, and he hadn't raised his voice once. Keanu checked his mirrors, the reflection showing the two officers standing in the middle of the path, looking like scolded children. The regret was already eating them alive, and he hadn't even left yet. The low rumble of the motorcycle engine vibrated through the soles of Officer Davis's boots. It was a steady, mechanical sound that seemed to drown out the noise of the city around them. For a long moment, nobody moved. Davis stood frozen, his chest rising and falling rapidly as the reality of the situation washed over him like a cold wave. He looked at his hands, the same hands that had pointed fingers and waved dismissively just minutes ago, and they felt foreign to him. He felt dirty. He looked at the man sitting on the motorcycle. Keanu wasn't looking at him with anger. He wasn't sneering. He was just waiting, patient as a stone. That patience was somehow worse than any shouting match could have been. It made Davis feel small. It made him feel like a bully on a playground who had just been told to go to the principal's office. The shame was a physical weight, pressing down on his shoulders, making his uniform feel too tight and too hot. Thompson, the younger officer, stood a few paces back. He was staring at the ground, his face burning a bright red. He felt sick to his stomach. He had watched it happen. He had laughed along, or at least, he hadn't stopped it. He had let his senior officer set the tone, and now that tone was revealed to be cruel and ignorant. He kept thinking about his mother or his friends, seeing the video that the woman was surely still holding on her phone. Police Officer Harris's Keanu Reeves. The headline wrote itself in his mind, and he wanted to disappear. Davis couldn't stand the silence. He couldn't stand the feeling of the crowd's eyes on him, judging him, knowing what he had done. He took a shaky step forward. The gravel crunched under his boot, sounding loud in the quiet park. He had to do something. He had to try to fix this. Even though he knew he couldn't really fix it, the damage was done. The humiliation had been handed out, but now it was bouncing back and hitting him twice as hard. "Wait," Davis said. His voice was weak, cracking in the middle. It didn't sound like a cop's voice anymore. It sounded like a scared man's voice. Keanu didn't pull away. He didn't rev the engine and speed off. He just sat there, one foot balancing the weight of the heavy bike, his hands resting on the handlebars. He turned his head slightly, the visor of his helmet still up, looking at Davis with those calm, dark eyes. He was listening. Davis took another step, closing the distance between them. He was close enough now that he could smell the leather of Keanu's jacket and the faint scent of gasoline from a bike. He looked at the actor, really looked at him, not as a suspect or a nuisance, but as a human being who had just been treated terribly for no reason. I am so sorry, Davis stammered. The words felt clumsy in his mouth. I didn't know. I swear to you, I didn't know. If I had known it was you, I wouldn't have spoken to you like that. He stopped, realizing how bad that sounded. It sounded like he was only sorry because the guy was famous. It sounded like it was okay to treat regular people like trash, just not movie stars. He saw a flicker of something in Keanu's eyes, maybe a realization of that same unfairness, and it made Davis's heart hammer against his ribs. Davis corrected himself, his voice trembling. I shouldn't have spoken to anyone like that. You were just sitting there. You were eating your lunch. And I judged you. I saw the clothes, and I made a decision. And I was wrong. I was so wrong. The older officer's eyes were watering now, despite his best efforts to keep them dry. He felt a tear escape and run down his cheek hot and fast. He didn't wipe it away. He just let it fall. I let the badge get to my head. I thought I was better than you. And I'm not. I'm not better than you. Keanu looked at him for a long time. The engine continued to purr, a stark contrast to the raw emotion spilling out of Davis. The crowd watched, mesmerized. They had come expecting a fight, or perhaps a righteous lecture from a celebrity. Instead, they were watching a grown man crumble under the weight of his own conscience. Slowly, Keanu took his right hand off the grip. He pulled off his leather glove, revealing a simple, work-worn hand. He extended it toward Davis. It wasn't a wave. It was an offer. Davis stared at the hand. It was an olive branch. It was forgiveness. He couldn't believe it. After the kicking, the yelling, the insults, Keanu was offering him a handshake. Davis hesitated, his own hand hanging by his side. He felt he didn't deserve it. He felt he deserved to be yelled at. He deserved to have the video posted online and his career ruined. Come on, Keanu said softly. We all have bad days. Don't let this one ruin you. That simple sentence broke Davis. He let out a choked sob and reached out. He grasped Keanu's hand. It was a firm, strong grip. Not limp, not weak. It was the grip of a man who understood strength wasn't about pushing people down. It was about lifting them up. They held the shake for a few seconds. In that moment, the cop and the actor were just two men standing in the sun, connected by a touch. Thank you, Davis whispered, his voice barely audible. Thank you. Keanu gave a small, sad smile. He released Davis's hand and pulled his glove back on. He turned his gaze to Thompson, who was still standing a few feet back, looking like he wanted the earth to swallow him whole. Keanu didn't say anything to Thompson. He didn't need to. He just gave him a slow, deliberate nod. It wasn't a nod of approval, but it wasn't a nod of condemnation either. It was an acknowledgement. I see you, the nod said. Now do better. Thompson nodded back, tears standing in his eyes, unable to speak. Keanu reached down and flipped the visor of his helmet down. The face disappeared, replaced by the black, reflective shield. It was like a curtain closing on a scene. He twisted his wrist, and the engine roared louder, the sound echoing off the trees and the buildings nearby. The crowd stepped back, creating a path. They weren't filming anymore. Most of them had lowered their phones. They were just watching, respect written all over their faces. They had seen a movie star handle a situation with more grace than most people could ever hope to muster. Keanu didn't look back. He didn't wave to the crowd. He didn't try to make a moment out of it. He just released the clutch and twisted the throttle. The motorcycle surged forward, smooth and powerful. The tires gripped the pavement and carried him away. Davis stood there, his hand still tingling from the handshake. He watched the red taillight of the bike grow smaller and smaller in the distance. The noise of the engine faded, replaced by the sounds of the city again, the birds, the distant traffic, the wind in the trees. He felt a hand on his shoulder. It was Thompson. Boss! Thompson asked quietly. "You okay?" Davis let out a long breath that he felt like he had been holding for years. He looked at his boots. He looked at the empty bench where the sandwich wrapper had been. He thought about the way Keanu had looked at him, not with hate, but with pity. And with that pity, he had been given a second chance. "No," Davis said, his voice rough but honest. "I'm not okay, but I'm going to be." He turned and looked at his partner. "We're going to be better than this, Thompson, starting right now. No more assumptions. No more judging people by their clothes. We're here to help people, even the ones who look like they don't belong." Thompson nodded, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. "Yes, sir." The two officers stood alone in the park for a long time. The sun began to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the grass. The humiliation was still there, a bitter taste in their mouths, but it had changed. It wasn't just shame anymore. It was a fuel. They had met a man who had every right to be angry, but chose to be kind instead. And that was a lesson they would carry with them for the rest of their lives. They got back into their car, but the energy was completely different. They drove away slowly, watching the road with new eyes, looking for people to help instead of people to hassle. The black and white patrol car moved slowly through the streets, the engine humming a low, steady rhythm that was the only sound inside the vehicle. The city was beginning to wake up from its afternoon lull. Traffic was picking up as people left their offices, eager to get home to their families. But inside the car, the air was thick with a heavy, thoughtful silence. Officer Davis kept both hands on the steering wheel, his grip tight. His eyes were focused on the road ahead, but his mind was miles away. He kept replaying the scene in the park over and over again. He saw the helmet skidding across the pavement. He heard his own voice, cruel and arrogant, shouting at a man who was just eating a sandwich. And most of all, he felt the memory of Keanu's hand in his. That firm, strong grip that offered forgiveness instead of anger. Beside him, Thompson sat with his notebook open on his lap, but he hadn't written a single word. He was staring out the window, watching the blur of buildings and trees. He felt different. He felt lighter, in a way, but also much heavier. The shame was still there, sitting in the pit of his stomach like a stone, but it was changing into something else. It was turning into a resolve. "You know," Thompson said quietly, breaking the silence, "I was scared back there." Davis glanced at him quickly, then looked back at the road. "Yeah, me too. I wasn't scared getting in trouble," Thompson continued, his voice gaining a little strength. "I was scared of how normal he was. I mean, he's this huge movie star. He could have had us fired in a second. He could have made us the laughing stock of the whole country. But he didn't." Davis nodded slowly. "He didn't because he's a better man than I am." The admission hung in the air. It was a hard thing for a senior officer to say, especially to a rookie, but it was the truth. Davis had spent 20 years wearing a badge, thinking it gave him the right to judge people. He thought he could look at a person's clothes or their hair and know their story. Today, that illusion had been shattered. He realized that he had been looking at the surface of people his entire life, completely missing the human being underneath. They drove for another few miles in silence. The sun was starting to dip lower in the sky, painting the city in shades of orange and gold. It was a beautiful evening, the kind of evening that usually made Davis feel good about his job. But tonight, he felt a strange sense of urgency. He felt like he needed to prove something. Not to Keanu, and not to the department, but to himself. Up ahead, near the entrance to a small grocery store, Davis saw a figure sitting on the curb. It was a young man, probably not even 20 years old. He had a backpack that looked too big for him, and was wearing a hoodie that was frayed at the cuffs. He had his head in his hands, and even from a distance, he looked defeated. Instinctively, Davis's foot hovered over the brake. In the past, his first thought would have been asterisk loitering. Move him along. Asterisk, he would have assumed the kid was up to no good, or maybe on drugs. He would have prepared his stern voice and his move-along speech. But today, he didn't see a nuisance. He saw a person. He saw someone who might be having the worst day of his life. Davis pulled the car over gently, not flipping on the lights or the siren. He just parked it and turned off the engine. He looked at Thompson. "Watch my back," Davis said softly. "But let me handle this." He stepped out of the car. The evening air was cooling down, a relief from the heat of the day. Davis walked over to the young man on the curb. He didn't stand over him. He didn't put his hands on his belt. Instead, he crouched down so he was on the same level as the kid. It was a small movement, but it changed everything. "Hey," Davis said. His voice was kind. It wasn't the bark of a cop. It was the voice of a neighbor. The young man looked up, startled. His eyes were red and puffy, as if he had been crying. When he saw the uniform, he flinched, pulling his backpack tighter against his chest. He was expecting trouble. He was expecting to be yelled at. I'm leaving," the kid stammered, scrambling to stand up. "I'm sorry, I'll go." "Whoa. Take it easy," Davis said, holding up a hand in a gentle stop motion. "You're not in trouble. You don't have to go." The kid froze, confusion washing over his face. "I'm not." "No," Davis said. "You just looked like you were having a rough time. I wanted to make sure you were okay." The kid looked at Davis, really looked at him, trying to find a trick. But there was no trick. There was just an older man with tired eyes offering a moment of kindness. The kid's shoulders slumped, and he sat back down on the curb, the energy draining out of him. "I lost my wallet," the kid whispered. "My phone, ID, everything. I don't have any money. I don't know how to get home. I was just scared." Davis nodded. He didn't question the story. He didn't ask for proof. He just reached into his own pocket and pulled out his card holder. He didn't give the kid money. He knew that wasn't what the kid needed. He needed help. "What's your name?" Davis asked. "Alex." "Okay, Alex," Davis said. "I'm Officer Davis. This is my partner, Thompson." He gestured back to the car where Thompson was watching with a small smile on his face. "Why don't you hop in the back? We can't give you a ride all the way home. That's against the rules. But we can take you to the station. We'll help you call a friend or a family member. We'll get you sorted out." Alex looked at the car, then at Davis. He couldn't believe it. "Really? You do that?" "Of course," Davis said. "We're here to help Alex. That's the job." As Alex climbed into the back of the patrol car, Davis felt a strange warmth spread through his chest. It wasn't the adrenaline of a chase or the power of an arrest. It was something quieter, something much more fulfilling. He realized that this was what he had signed up for all those years ago. He had just forgotten it somewhere along the way. They drove to the station in a comfortable silence. When they arrived, Thompson stayed with Alex while Davis made a few phone calls. Within an hour, Alex's brother had arrived to pick him up. The brother was shaking Davis's hand, thanking him profusely, tears in his eyes. Alex was smiling, a real smile, the weight of the world lifted off his young shoulders. Walking back to the patrol car later that evening, Davis felt tired. It had been a long day. It had been a day of humiliation and shame, but it had also been a day of redemption. He looked up at the sky. The stars were starting to peek through the fading light. He thought about Keanu Reeves. He wondered where the actor was right now. Maybe he was at home. Maybe he was riding his motorcycle along the coast. Davis hoped he was happy. He hoped he knew that his brief moment of kindness had rippled out further than he could ever imagine. "Good work today, kid," Davis said to Thompson as they got back into the car for the final drive back to the precinct. Thompson smiled. "You too, Davis. You too." They drove off into the night. They were the same two officers who had started the shift that morning. They wore the same uniforms, drove the same car, and had the same names. But they weren't the same men. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a new understanding. They knew now that a badge didn't make you better than anyone else. It just gave you the responsibility to treat everyone with the dignity they deserved, no matter what they were wearing or where they were sitting. And sometimes, if you were lucky, life gave you a second chance to get it right. Davis knew he would never forget the man on the bench. He would never forget the regret. But more importantly, he would never forget the grace that turned that regret into a lesson that would last a lifetime. The city lights flashed by, bright and beautiful, and for the first time in a long time, Davis felt like he was truly a part of them.